Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome you all to our today's exchange meeting for tool providers within the Diligence project. My name is Ursula Kopp, and I'm part of the team of the Institute for Managing Sustainability at the Vienna University of Economics and Business, and I'm your facilitator for today. Thank you very much for joining. It's a pleasure to have you here. Traceability is rapidly becoming more important. Some regulations and international initiatives even require companies to demonstrate transparent and auditable supply chain information. Both within our Diligence project and by the GIZ, traceability systems have been tested and assessed and in this workshop, the two lead authors of these reports are ready to share their findings and practical insights today. Thank you very much for that and welcome. Daniel Montfort, who is also project partner in the Diligence project. Currently he also coordinates the Horizon Europe MediTrace C project and on traceability of battery raw materials. He's a geological engineer working at the French Geological and Mining Research Bureau. And there is Hans Merket. He's a researcher and policy manager at the Belgian Research Institute EPIS, that gives policy advice about peace, sustainable development, and human rights. Hans himself concentrates on the impact and effectiveness of efforts to enhance human rights due diligence and on the fight against conflict financing and money laundering. Welcome to both of you and thank you very much for taking the time today. This workshop will be recorded and the recording will be made available afterwards as well as the slides. We will have a Q&A session after the two presentations. You may post questions into the chat at any time or you wait until after the two presentations. May I start with Daniel now, the first to present your insights.
Thank you. Thank you, Ursula, for your nice introduction. So I will present a work that we did in the framework of DiliiCHANCE Project, but it's having a strong relations and a strong echo with the work that we are doing in the other project that you mentioned, MediTrace, which was a project about raw material traceability, a project that ended last month, and we are finalizing last deliverables of our project. So thank you very much, and also thank you to my colleagues Capucine and Basile who contributed also to this work of traceability systems and tool. So first of all, that's something that I presented in our final event of MediTrace project last month. Those last 2-3 years, we observe a sort of tsunami of raw material traceability institutional documents. So we all the big agencies that are more or less interesting and following those topics publish certain things, certainly of high interest. So, and that's a little bit complicated to navigate because, yeah, when you all face a tsunami, you have some problems. So, but that's the reality that we had many information. So next slide, please, Angelo. So just here a screenshot of several documents that were published recently. For example, we have the International Energy Agency and OECD. They published one report about the role of traceability in critical mineral supply chains, and a new one from EFA published in May of this year that I will show some results of it about, once again, traceability and energy and economic security. We have UNSCE and United Nations that is also working a lot on that because they have one interoperability project for traceability for all different commodities and products. In Australia, they have also a traceability roadmap that is very insightful for us. We have also focused on some parts of the world. So, for example, this study of traceability with a focus on Africa. We have research projects such as MediTrace, but also another one in Finland. And we have also norms, like, for example, ISO, that they published a norm of traceability of rare earths last year. So we have plenty of documentation. And my colleague later will also present their recent work done by the German cooperation. So there is plenty of documents and projects and initiatives going in the field of traceability. So just an overview of, for example, that's International Energy and OECD framework for 2015. That's one of their main results, that for traceability you need a sort of triangle of three big things. So we need governance and verification. So you need to be aligned with OECD due diligence guidelines, third-party verification, etc. That's one thing. Other thing is that because traceability means supply chain means that we can't work in a silo. So we need to collaborate around different actors of the supply chain. So that's supply chain collaboration. That's essential. And the other part, it's technical infrastructure. So that's a little bit maybe the things that we are going to discuss later today. But that's only a part of traceability. If we imagine that traceability is only the technical infrastructure, we are wrong. It's a part, it's an essential part, and for sure we have in the middle minerals and the reasons and the data input that we require, because we are in a environmental, social, and governance data points. That's also important. Traceability is having a strong connection with ESG, at least with our interpretation. Next one, please, Angelo. So with echo with that, a colleague of Montan Leuven University in Austria, in Leuven, and I participate to this work. We conceptualize a little bit this thing, and that should be a conceptual framework for traceability. What is important of this schema that maybe is very complex, but technology and analytics, like for example, digital product passport, blockchain solutions, material tagging, and those things are just technological and analytical brick. At the end, what we want is to have a supply chain management aligned with compliance with regulation and governance for sure, having in mind that the objective is to assess social and environmental impacts, and what we want is to ensure a certain monitoring of the performance. And all these connections and the enables and enables makes this conceptual framework. But once again, if traceability is only technical tools, we are wrong. Next one, please. So just a screenshot of this recent EOA report of 2026 of this year. Certain mining companies in the world are saying what are the type of information that is contained in their traceability system. So there are plenty of companies that they say that they have a traceability system put in place. That's in the plot on right. So for example, we have that many midstream companies have a traceability system. Not all upstream companies have traceability, but we'll say that in general, more than 50% of companies have a traceability system put in place. But if we look to the information that is inside into those traceability systems, is mostly country of origin, location of the mine of origin, and let's say identification of upstream actors. Later, environmental information is less than 50% of those traceability systems contains information about that, and even corporate transparency is less than 50%. So we have still a big progress to do in terms of the information which is contained into those traceability systems. Next one, please. So we have tools, initiatives, norms, projects. So some ideas. We have, first of all, digital tools. That's something that we are going to speak later. So that's digital product passport, blockchain solutions, etc. Later, we have industrial standards, ISO or American standards. Standards are agreement at industrial level that how we should connect our systems and the wording, etc. That's important also to have in mind. We have also big industry-driven programs of data ecosystem and data exchange. Maybe the most important one in battery, and it will be, for example, Catena X, which is mostly driven by automobile sector. Later, we have tagging tool providers that I will show you a little bit later what it is. Later, we have international initiatives, as for example, United Nations, CEFAC 20P. in terms of interoperability. That's a UN level. Later, we have also civil society and NGOs tools, which are also essential, and it's a third party a mechanism also of grievance in a certain way, etc. It's important also to have it, and it's a part of this landscape. Later, we have international guidelines, recommendations, roadmaps, so G7, Australia, OECD, EA, etc. And we have research projects, MATITRACE, or for example, the work that will be shown later from the GIZ. So, wow, plenty of different things. So it's quite difficult to map everything. So in terms of tools, I propose this three type of tools. So mostly we have digital tools, where digital product passport, blockchain, and that's I will give some names and some examples of that later. Later we have what I call open source tools, which are not traceability per se, but we are mostly facing supply chain mapping. And that's also, in general, they are open. Certain ones are open source and they are open. And I have some examples coming from NGOs. I think it's also important to have in mind that we have also this type of tools. And later we have material fingerprint and material tagging. What's that? It's to analyze based on intrinsic material characteristics in laboratory, plus a statistical treatment, try to determine the origin, the geographical origin of a material. That's something that, particularly in my team, we are doing. So in Diligence, we map different traceability tools with case studies, and we were looking for public case studies related to metals and minerals. So including, for example, vehicles and batteries. We did a benchmark and analysis of publicly available information with those case studies and identify main drivers, limitations, and patterns. So yeah, next one, please, Angelo. So that's a list of certain tools where we found this information. So that's companies or tool providers, MindSpiders, Fedity Circular, Circularize, SourceMap, Tilcal, iTraceAT, CatenaX, Resource Matters, Resource, and Pradal. That were the tools where we found those case studies publicly in their official website, because it's more difficult to get access to real case studies, but at least we refer to public case studies that can be a battery passport and those things. So I'm not saying that this list is completely exhaustive, but I think that the interest is that anyone can click and navigate and see what contains these those different tools. Next one, please, also, Angelo. For material fingerprint, so that's based on the characteristic of materials, we have a less variety of tools or companies. We see that we have mostly companies providing services for minerals around jewelry and gemstones. That's which is in the field of commercial solution. In the field of science, I had the pleasure, and that's something we participate in BERGEM, and we are still working on those things. But that was mostly in scientific field. But in terms of commercial solutions, for example, we can cite Oritain, which is a company from New Zealand, but also operating globally. And also some companies based in Switzerland, they have solutions on that, mostly for gold and gemstones. So all those tools, and that was very interesting to navigate in the official websites. All those tools refer to different regulations. First of all, they refer to EU battery regulation. I think that it's the main driving regulation that it's cited by all the tool providers. That means that when we go to the official website of any tool provider, they say, our tool is compliant with EU battery regulation. That means that EU battery regulation has been really a driver, push for that, and in a certain way created also a business for that. That's evident. And EU battery regulation is being cited even for tool providers that are not based in Europe. And I think also that's important. Another one, which is another regulation, which is quite important, maybe less for metals, but many of those tools are material agnostic, I will say. So they can refer to textile, plastics, etc. So many of those tools refer also to deforestation regulation in the EU. So that's because many of the case studies that we didn't include in our document because they don't refer to minerals, but yeah, we had food, textile, timber, and that's really important. But we can also imagine that certain things of the mining is an activity that is creating deforestation. So we can imagine certain in this direction. I don't know. For sure, we have also referring to sustainable due diligence directive, also related to eco-design, because those tools can also be a tool for recycling and circular economy, and that's the connection with eco-design regulation. We have also references to carbon border mechanism. And for tools at global scale, they also refer to regulations in the USA, such as Inflation Regulation Act and forced labor in the USA. Tariff. We have also tools mapping tariff exposure of different products, and also there are certain tools that refer to German Due Diligence Act. So that's a national regulation inside European Union. Next one, please. So just that's a screenshot of different tools that we collected, that we assess. So for example, we have battery passports here in the top, Spherity case study and CC case study. That's from MindSpider, MindSpider and Spherity. So two examples of battery passport. For your information, probably you know, but battery passport will be operational next year in February. So for the instance, we map it examples, but next year we are supposed to have real case studies. Also, we include the case study of a digital product passport for intermediate products. Like, for example, it was here manganese, a manganese intermediate product from a mining company in France, Eramet. We have also supply chain mapping initiatives that are open source, like, for example, this cobalt supply chain, which is quite interesting because we can see the connection between different actors, but that's open source. And maybe we have a problem of updating of this data. And we have also Source Map, which is a US company providing also supply chain mapping. And for example, they did the supply chain mapping of Perform. Next one, please. So some conclusions of this tool benchmark. To ensure the regularity compliance is the main argument of tool providers, and that's totally normal. They provide also, all of them provide solutions about the encryption of data, immutable records from auditors, from CO2 companies, from CO2 evaluators, etc. That's also something important. We had few or almost no case studies tackling complicated ESG contexts, such as artisanal small mining scale activity. So in general, the case studies that we see are industrial certified mines or raw material companies connected to EU OEMs. That are the case studies that mostly what we are seeing. So that's an OEM that he wants to put in place a traceability system, and mostly we map industrial certified mines. But what about artisanal and small mining? We have less public case studies on that. There is a strong linkage between traceability outputs and operation. The traceability outputs and operational decisions in the field is not inherent, and we don't have information on that. So the possibility for a more transparency about certification and audits is not evident with the case studies that we have. For example, we don't know if there are mass ballast controls and those type of mechanisms with the available information, once again. For material tagging, we see that is a real business, that is a real commercial activity for some laboratories for food, for timber and clothes. For minerals, it remains only visible for jewelry materials, so gold and gemstones. And I think this is my last one. So the conclusions of this work of benchmark and this assessment: big diversity of tools, first of all, and plenty of tools in the market. So we see also that it's a very competitive field. we feel that there is a big expectation for the first wave of battery passports in 2027. That's evident. We see also that interoperability between systems is the key. It's not only us that is saying that. Many of those documents say the same thing. What we see is that case studies, so a passport for one material in one region between company A and company B. So maybe there is a risk of very limited impact because the case studies that we see are just a small part of the supply chain. We need to go in general from data visualization to data verification. That's something that certain tools have already, those mechanisms of verify credentials and auditors, identification, etc. But we need still more. Also, those tools are not giving any incorporation of remedy or grievance mechanism. That's a sentence that I really like, is that it was a colleague that proposed me at that traceability produces knowledge, but responsibility depends on how that knowledge is used. And I think that that's an essential and a very nice conclusion for that. So at the end, we should avoid a situation where traceability is an end in itself, so technically sophisticated, because those tools require high levels of data integration, etc. But disconnected a little bit of responsible supply chain outcomes and the main purpose, which is once again responsible supply chains. I can speak much more, but I think that that's okay. That's enough. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions later.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you very much. If there are no immediate questions, then I would rather do the second presentation and then have plenty of time for discussion and direct questions to both of you. That would work. Thank you, Daniel. Your report is not yet publicly available, but we will be able to send it out to all of you together with the recordings and the slides next week. Thank you for that too. So now it's up to me to hand over to Hans Merket. Your report is already available and we can also send out the link. Hans, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and good afternoon, everyone. I propose we immediately go to the next slide, which gives, well, the issue that triggered this research. And I'm actually starting, I think, more or less where Daniel was ending his presentation about the importance of traceability as a tool, not an end in itself. And basically, let's say the problem statement behind our research is that when traceability is not embedded in a broader due diligence approach, it risks to impose mainly new barriers on producer countries, and definitely when it's purely seen as a standalone compliance tool from a consumer market perspective. And then these barriers for producer countries have an even bigger impact on the small players in those jurisdictions. And then we think about SMEs, junior miners, and of course the artisanal and small-scale mining sector. And when that happens, when these barriers lead to, let's say, exclusion, that undermines the very objectives traceability is designed to serve. And then one is, of course, sustainability, but the other is also supply chain resilience. I think that's the word we hear now everywhere, all the time. And that is a key risk here and an important, let's say, selling point of why it's important to take the producer country perspective into account is that when segments or actors are excluded, you lose the visibility you need to manage risks in terms of supply, geopolitical risks or reputational risks. So the next slide, that's the rationale behind the study, is basically we try to find out how traceability can advance ESG objectives, so meet this downstream demand, while at the same time also contributing to producer country priorities. We did that by mapping different traceability systems. We had 27, but as you'll see, some are different than the ones Daniel mentioned. It's a constantly evolving field. We did interviews with actors across the supply chain, and we also presented key findings for validation at the mining indaba in South Africa earlier this year. Next slide, please. That's before I go into key findings. Very briefly on the digital traceability landscape, as I said, a very complex, constantly evolving landscape. On the visual, we show here that these are the 27, let's say, tools at which we looked, organized by the mineral categories they cover. And given that this can be quite confusing, this landscape, that also risks to affect policy making, which is why we try to group these different initiatives, efforts in 4 categories. The first one for us is the commercial solutions. This is basically when we think about digital tools, that's the majority of the group that you see indicated in yellow, that are tech-based companies that develop tools to automate data capture, chain of custody management. Examples, as Daniel already mentioned, are MindSpider, Everledger, also a tool like ValueTrax, which is Anglo American's in-house traceability tool. A second group is the multi-stakeholder programs that essentially embed these digital tool providers in a broader responsible sourcing logic, with different actors involved, often a public financing actor also. And for instance, there's a program called TinLink that involves Luna Smelter based in Rwanda, MindSpider, and other actors, often also NGOs for monitoring and oversight. A third category is the support infrastructure. That's basically the architecture that sits behind these solutions, that allows data to travel between companies, also between different solutions tools. That's when we talk about interoperability. I'll also come back to that later. And then finally, there's the research and development initiatives that test and try new approaches, as we found also MediTrace to fit in this broader landscape. Next slide, where I'll start going into key findings. I listed 4 for today's discussion. The first one is about operating this patchwork of systems. So in this visual that you see on the right, we organize these same tools, but on the segment of the supply chain they cover. And in the last column, you see also the few tools that make an explicit effort to integrate the artisanal and small-scale mining sector. So this already shows that there's quite fragmented landscape, also because every tool serves a specific objectives, and all critical material supply chains are different, with different traceability needs and challenges along the way. So it's quite rare that a company will be relying on one system to cover its need entirely for material tracking from mine to final product. And it is also solutions that sit in a closed space often struggle to address this and to scale. And that's why, indeed, as Daniel also mentioned, the key to scaling is interoperability, allowing data to travel between companies, between systems, between jurisdictions, without repeated re-entry, reformatting, or loss of meaning of the data. I think today's audience might know this already quite well, so I can be brief. It's indeed not just a technical challenge. I think the past years, we've seen many efforts of all these different digital solutions to make it possible, this interoperability possible on a technical level, but it's also a governance challenge, requiring the different actors along the supply chain to sit together, to agree on common standards, on common identifiers, on data formats, on exchange protocols, and so on. And a key initiative in that regard is the UN Transparency Protocol, that applies across sectors, but has a specific extension for critical raw materials as well, and seeks to have this technical language that allows this governance, decentralized governance of data across borders in a transparent way. It is also this approach is essential today, also in the current geopolitical context, where we not only see a battle for access to minerals, but also increasingly a battle of access to data and ownership over data, which is also a key risk that initiatives like the UN Transparency Protocol can address. Next slide, please. That's on the producer country perspective. So we see that a lot of the traceability requirements, approaches have been developed from a downstream perspective, from a consumer market perspective, and consultation of producer country stakeholders often happened when key parameters had already been set. And that's also why in producer countries, these requirements are often felt as an additional administrative burden on top of already a high list of challenges that they need to fulfill in order to access consumer markets. There's also, this relates to a question of the cost-benefit imbalance, whereas we see that today traceability is mainly providing benefits downstream in terms of regulatory compliance, reputational management, risk management, while a lot of the extra efforts are being borne upstream, where the infrastructure needs to be put in place to allow this traceability. And that's a missed opportunity, because traceability can also be a strategic asset for meeting producer country priorities. Think of improved fiscal management, detection of illicit flows, developing strategies for value addition. These are all key buzzwords, key priorities in producer countries that have today not been realized. It is also in order to realize this, we need co-design of approaches. While today it's often seen as a parallel effort, you have traceability, international traceability approaches on the one hand, and then producer country data systems that I think there's already a lot of building blocks in place in producer countries. Think of mining cadastre systems, production records, evaluation of exports, and so on. But this data often remains paper-based in many jurisdictions. It's decentralized across institutions. It's difficult to access. And that makes it also difficult to link with these international traceability efforts. There are some exceptions. You have a number of platforms, portals being developed in producer countries to have improved oversight of critical mineral production and trade. There's Moses is a well-known platform in Zambia. There's Simbara in Indonesia. There's SEM 2.0 in Chile. These are not platforms that are designed to meet international traceability requirements, but really from a domestic need to better manage data and improve oversight. Many jurisdictions, producer country jurisdictions, don't have such platforms yet, which is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, because it creates the potential of a win-win strategy, whereby supporting digitalization of official public data systems helps to improve government oversight, while at the same time also making this domestic data available for international traceability efforts. My next slide is about the making sure that the artisanal and small-scale mining sector doesn't miss the boat. And that requires a dedicated approach, because if we apply these traceability requirements rigidly to ASM, they will be excluded, or a big part of this subsector will be excluded. And exclusion does not mean that the risks that are associated with this sector go away. You actually push those risks into less visible challenge and make them even harder to manage. That is a problem also because artisanal and small-scale mining accounts for a considerable share of production of certain critical minerals. Think of the Democratic Republic of Congo, cobalt production, Treaty production. However, we also see that this share is often not enough to create a business case to engage with the higher level of risk associated with the sector. And for instance, in our mapping of tools, it's quite striking that most of the tools that have made it possible to integrate an ASM perspective have done so with public funding, with support of initiatives like the European Partnership for Responsible Minerals Trade or GIZ or others. That have, so they have support all kinds of pilot projects, and these pilot projects have been important. There's been a lot of lesson learning from them. For instance, and that's, I think, a point that Daniel also made several times that I'll also continue to make, that it's not all about technology, that making this work depends on governance, on having the right incentives in place, having the right workflows. But the challenge of all these pilots has also been scaling. How can you not only focus on a few mine sites and a few cooperatives, but have a nationwide impact? And then these efforts often stumble over challenges such as the sector's informality, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of digital literacy, connectivity, and so on. And that's why we think also, and what we argue in the report, is that we need a new approach. It's time to move beyond these pilot projects. And we use there the concept of managed uncertainties, promoting supply chain actors to engage with risks rather than to avoid them. And to do so, we need to accept that perfection cannot be an entry condition. That's the logic of the OECD due diligence guidance for responsible minerals of progressive improvement. Start where traceability is workable on an intermediary level, maybe on a trading hub level, because in some countries you have hundreds or thousands of artisanal small-scale mining sites. It's not possible to try and ensure traceability from every single mine until the point of export, but engage where it's possible and then gradually push traceability efforts further upstream. An interesting example is from Chile, where you have ENAMI, that's the state mining corporation that engages with the artisanal and small-scale copper miners to buy their production, make it enter into formal channels. In return, also for support in terms of commercialization and geological data. And there we see that traceability, if you embed it in such a commercial relation or a support relation, it is a lot more workable than when you just add it as an extra criterion for which the ASM sector gets nothing in return. And then final slide, it's also a bit as a kind of concluding lesson again on why it's not just about technology, but more about governance. A question we get, and that maybe GIZ also had hoped we would answer with this study, is to have a ranking of tools, to have a menu people can choose from in which scenario, which digital tool is the best. Our conclusion is, unfortunately, that's not something that we can give. I don't think it's possible, because which tool works best depends on the context, on the production levels, on level of formalization, level of risk, different needs, which is why we also have so many tools out there. But generally, we can say, for instance, in ASM context, especially where risks are high, formalization is low, the starting point may actually be quite low tech. You can have number tags, or you can have records by a cooperative. You can gradually build on that by having QR codes, barcodes. Next step would then be to upload these identifiers on a blockchain ledger. And every step of further technology helps to automate data processes, definitely where the infrastructure is in place, where the routines are in place. But the overall lesson is also that technology only shifts outcomes when three conditions are met. One is reliable data capture. That's, of course, key. If the data is not, if it is wrong from the start or not reliable from the start, it will not, traceability will not fix that. A second one is credible verification. That's key, because we see with traceability scaling, the volume of data to verify is only increasing, and it becomes impossible to verify everything. So you need a transparent, risk-based decision in that regard, in what you will verify, how you will verify, based on which data. In certain contexts, you need a human element there to verify data. Definitely when we talk about these informal contexts. AI can help to identify where controls are needed, but still there is always this verification still needs to happen. In low risk context, it can be more on a spot check basis, but it's important to be transparent about that and to really have a deliberate decision in how to verify, and not just go with something that appears to work. And also a third condition is having the capacity to respond to risks. It must mean that when something is identified that doesn't seem right, it's possible to have a due diligence approach to respond to it. So finally, we see that technology will continue to evolve. So it's important to continue to invest in new possibilities, but also not in the hope of finding one day the single silver bullet that will solve all our traceability needs. We will always rely on the many different tools that are out there, which is why the priority, the current priorities are, as Daniel already said, and as many reports say, interoperability being key. And I would add a second one also to address the cost dilemma, because today we see that everybody wants traceability. Nobody is able to carry all the costs it involves. And generally, but we can elaborate a bit more on it later, but I think it requires better balancing costs with incentives and benefits, as that balance doesn't seem to sit right now. So I'll stop here. I hope that was, in a nutshell, still clear enough, and I thank you a lot for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Hans. Wonderful. The two presentations, I think they went really well together. Yeah, we stop here and I turn my head towards you, the participants today. It's for you now if you want. You can post questions into the chat if you like, or you raise your hand, because we're not such a big group today. We're more a small expert group. So you may also raise your hand and talk to Hans or Daniel or start a discussion, post your comment, whatever you like. But until you think about what you want to add, I maybe ask one or two questions in the meantime. Hans, you mentioned the UN Transparency Protocol. Could you maybe say something about what the expectations in the industry are about this protocol, and can this maybe become a game changer in the whole game?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's definitely the way to go, the UN Transparency Protocol, and I think there's a group of dedicated actors, especially let's say the industry associations, that are quite committed to it. There's already practical examples of the UNTP logic architecture being put in place. There's the Global Battery Alliance battery passports that are built on that. There's also the Responsible Business Alliance transparency protocol that is being piloted for certain critical minerals with, I think, over 20 actors across the supply chain. The challenge is, however, and that's also in interviews, what these industry associations told us, is that they still struggle with convincing their membership of the relevance and urgency of these measures. And so I think the next step is now to move beyond this group of, let's say, already convinced actors to reach the wider set of players along the supply chain. A key challenge there is, of course, reconciling transparency with confidentiality concerns. That's, I think, what many industry actors face. And definitely also when we look across jurisdictions, and particularly in the midstream, when we think of a jurisdiction like China, where there's a lot of critical mineral transactions players that are currently not part of these discussions, that I think is a key, is the key next challenge to address now that basically on a technical level, there's clarity on how to move forward. But now we need to get midstream on board, but also the producer country perspective on board.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Looking at the time, I want to say again, thank you very much, Hans and Daniel, for sharing all of this. And it's up to me to announce our next webinar, our next program. Last May, we had a webinar where we focused on the resilience of supply chains in times of crisis. And in our upcoming webinar on the 20th of July, we will highlight how companies are responding to ongoing geopolitical challenges affecting global supply chains, with wonderful speakers there again. Thanks once again, Hans, Daniel, for taking the time, for sharing, and thank you all for being part of this. And we will send you all the information next week. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.